Hey there, welcome to episode 88 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at about just about 10:30 in the morning on October 22nd, 2024. It's a nice Tuesday, something below 75 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Summer is taking a brief respite if you like, here in Vegas, so the weather is nice. I think the triple-digit weather is done. Now we need clear skies without dust or other particulates, and I will be much happier. In the meantime, let us today speak of our foundation, civic volunteerism, and the world at large behind the scenes. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you are able to locate the episode description, which contains some show notes, a summary of today's episode, which I will read to you, and the links that go along with today's episode. As you may or may not know, the Innovate for Vegas Foundation is a Nevada nonprofit public charity. It's a 501c3 public charity, in fact. We've been a 501c3 for just over 2 years from the date of our determination. As of those of you who know, the actual date is retroactive to our formation date, but it's another 2 years, which I'll get into in a moment. So we're a 501c3 public charity. Our purpose is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. We were a former Code for America brigade, Code for Vegas, and when we rebooted back in the summer of 2022, we were initially the Code for Vegas Foundation, but not everything is code. So to be more inclusive and inviting to other potential civic volunteers who are not necessarily coders, we renamed to fit into the general scheme here in the greater Vegas area, what with the Innovation Center, where we were holding our monthly hackathon meetups, located in the downtown Vegas area, sometimes called the Innovation District, in our fine innovation destination city that is the greater Vegas area. So there you go. Innovate for Vegas. 2 years since we officially became a 501c3 public charity as determined by the fine, always popular Internal Revenue Service. So then, wherever you are able to locate those episode description words, I will read some of them to you now. The summary of today's episode: the exciting worlds of nonprofit public charity endeavoring civic volunteerism, storytelling, and the always essential, difficult to describe umbrella category, miscellaneous, can make for some interesting times, but also some interesting times. Let's get into it. The links for today's episode, some of them will sound familiar if you have listened previously. First, our organization website. It's still a one-pager, but I'm starting to work on breaking it up into more useful elements, so it's not such a wall of text. The Innovate for Vegas Foundation homepage, located at innovateforvegas.org. That's Innovate, F-O-R Vegas, no punctuation. And then dot, so that is punctuation, and then O-R-G, innovateforvegas.org. It's basically an information site, presently and recently hosted on GitHub as GitHub pages. Our main website is really for information and discovery of our organization. We will probably go down a sandbox route to deploy some things that might be interesting. There may be a subdomain or some other notions. We have a lot of initiatives and a lot of potential ways of deploying them so people can try them and use them and interact with them. So we'll see how that fits into there. But in the meantime, innovateforvegas.org, presently hosted on GitHub pages, and will begin to draw in actual initiative information from our various initiatives and component projects, and most importantly, the participants in all of those, so that our site tracks what we're actually doing more closely in an automated fashion, because, humans are busy. Let's let the computers do some work for us, right? Our projectact.info website, project-act, that's ACT, .info. There you can find out where we are on our Autonomous Cohort Tessellation Initiative. There's also the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Initiative. So one acronym, two related projects or related initiatives about civic volunteer organizations and individuals and cohorts and how we can discover and communicate and so on, all kinds of good stuff. So the .info website will be quite literally information about not only Project ACT, but about how to interact with others that are using the tools and methods that we're designing here. It's ideally a collaboration. Collaboration with others is the name of the game. So hopefully other individuals and cohorts will participate. Presently, it's Innovate for Vegas Foundation is technically a fiscal sponsor. Fiscal. So Project ACT is under those terms also a 501c3 tax exempt for the purposes of donation organization. It's more of a project than a formal organization. And so those are basically the two modes of operation of a fiscal sponsor, if you're curious. So Project ACT, driven at present by the Innovate for Vegas Foundation as its fiscal sponsor, but always open to other organizations and individuals to join in so that we can develop tools and methods that will enable the big three: connection, communication, collaboration, not only among civic volunteer organizations, but pretty much anybody. By the way, using the power of a decentralized semantic web, the solution was already there right in front of us, and yet the likes of Twitter and Facebook. Anyway, agileforvolunteers.org, just like it sounds, Agile for Volunteers, Agile, A-G-I-L-E, for volunteers, no punctuation, and then .org. This is a simple, so projectact.info and agileforvolunteers.org are both also hosted as GitHub pages. There's a very simple starting page there, landing page. But Agile for Volunteers will essentially be the landing spot to locate documentation, example templates, workflows, general, whatever tools we might need to manage organizations and repositories and issues, tasks, plans, etc. So it's a collection of tools and methods that we are assembling as an initiative, the Agile for Volunteers initiative at Innovate for Vegas Foundation, to make collaboration on volunteer projects a little bit easier for all involved. I've talked about this in previous episodes. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. There may even be a completely separate audio program aimed at implementation, improvement, iteration, ongoing discussion, anecdotes about Agile for Volunteers. So we'll see where that path leads. Either way, so those are the normal three. I have a link to the Alliance of Civic Technologists, which also uses the ACT acronym, unrelated. Technically, we started talking about Project ACT in October of 2022, so 2 years ago, probably 2 years ago now. And it was only a couple of days. We received our determination on 19 October, so it was within days of that the Project ACT discussions began for various reasons. But the Alliance of Civic Technologists, we'll talk about that briefly, but civictechnologists.org, CIVIC, technologist, that's GISTS, civictechnologists.org. The Alliance of Civic Technologists is essentially, you can visit their website, but to summarize, is essentially looking to become a successor, I won't say replacement, but sort of to fill the role that Code for America had previously with their brigade program until they discontinued or sunset the brigade program in December of 2023. The Open Austin organization, open-austin.org. I mention them here because they are a former brigade, the last surviving Texas Code for America brigade post-sunset. So I guess, are we now into the sunrise? I'm not sure. So openaustin.org, I attended one of their sort of onboarding introduction meetups that I found via, I can't remember if I found it via their website or LinkedIn page, meetup maybe. They have an Eventbrite page that you can sign up for a free ticket, so to speak, to coordinate participation. And it was a 1-hour gathering. This is useful to do every once in a while to reach out to other organizations and participate in an online meetup, virtual gathering, whether it's an actual project meetup or perhaps an onboarding session, or like we have our office hours, something like that. So I wanted to link to them, and a little shout for allowing me to join in. I was one of 3 people for that particular meetup. I think it's every other Monday, so you can check that out. civichackers.org, civic-hackers.org. Civic Hackers is an organization for civic hackers. You will find former brigade members from the Code for America Brigade days and others involved in civic volunteerism, civic projects, community outreach projects, and so on. It's a good rally point, which we'll get into briefly. And I did participate Friday, so that was 5 days ago, in a Zoom call with 14 other people, 14 total, 13 other people, regarding the upcoming Civic Hacker Summit, which should be the beginning of December. So that will be relevant. All of these links will be relevant to today's discussion. They are but scratching the surface of various individuals and organizations, formal and informal, cohorts, groups, actual nonprofits or similar, that are out there. Some of them you may know of, some of them you may not. I'm sure I only barely completely understand the terrain based on what's visible and what's findable. So discovery, always a challenge. So I'm not purporting to be the authoritative source to go to for any of these. So these are just my recent dealings and engagements in this area. There are many more. And finally, in case you got a little bit confused by my use of that all of the things that I'm touching on behind the scenes can make for some interesting times, but also some interesting times. I have a link to the May You Live in Interesting Times Wikipedia page. I think the summary is it is an English language speaking expression that is often attributed to an ancient Chinese curse, but it is neither ancient nor Chinese. I believe John F. Kennedy made a reference to interesting times being a challenge, sometimes negative, based on a character, the misinterpretation of a Chinese character that had different elements to it. Either way, you can do some reading about that. Interesting times can be good or bad. So it makes for some interesting times in a good way, but also some interesting times in a bad way. I mean, in a good way and a bad way, or a bad way and a good way. So there you go. So it's the other 2 years. We have been at this for over 2 years, actually. We had our first hackathon, I think, in March of 2022. It was open transit. We've made almost no progress on that since nobody wanted to continue and commit their time, such as life. But we started rebooting the Code for Vegas organization as Code for Vegas Foundation over 2 years ago. But as it happens, we received our 501c3 determination letter from the IRS on 19 October 2022. So it's been kind of another 2-year anniversary. For those of you who have gone through the 1023 process, we did with the 1023 EZ, and we did not anticipate being a large and sprawling organization to get the reboot going. So you know that for a 1023 EZ filing, a 501c3 under those circumstances has a 3-year cap on gross receipts, $50,000 per year. We have fallen a little bit short of that for the first 2 years. In fact, we've come nowhere near that for the first 2 years. I think our donations for last year were around $40 from the outside, from not including the time and energy and cash outlays from the governors, the directors on our board of directors, people that are participating in the governance and generally driving the organization. So $50,000 of actual donations, well under the $50,000 cap. to say the least. That will be a challenge when we actually launch things. So we'll see how year 3 goes as we begin to ramp up our potential for deploying actual useful things. Because, actual useful things take money. Cloud hosting, servers, bandwidth, storage, all the bad words, but also public facing and perhaps a real world manifestations of physical objects, or maybe we want to get t-shirts or make stickers or any of those little things as we sort of enter the light. The sunrise is upon us. How about that? But the time has come to roll out with some of these things, and so maybe we'll attract some attention and maybe some donations, and we'll see if we can. We'll still come in under 50,000, but we'll see. We'll see what happens for year 3. Our fiscal year ends on June 30th, so we are in our 3rd fiscal year right now. But no, it's not about donations. That's not why we're doing this. Obviously, nonprofit. We're not here to make money, though. Rolling out some of the things will be easier if we are. We can attract potential donors, and then we can roll out some of the things. And then hopefully we'll attract some more potential donors, and we can roll out some more of the things. As long as the correlation between these and our purpose to make our communities better still works, then that's what we're doing. So community elevation is the name of the game. The current state of affairs. As I've mentioned, we are a reboot of the former Code for Vegas from around a decade ago. One of our board director emeritus, Sean Looker, was the original co-founder and co-captain with Ryan Quinn back in, was it 2013, 12? I think it was 2012, 12, 13, somewhere in there. I had moved to Vegas just in there somewhere. I had no idea about any of these things. So they worked with Code for America at the time to roll out the City of Las Vegas open data platform, which still exists today. When Ryan and Sean moved away from the Vegas area, they basically shut down the brigade as it was. I don't think it was formally called a brigade. I think Code for America was still early in their definition of the program and whatnot, but Code for Vegas was part of Code for America in one way or another. So when we rebooted the Code for Vegas Foundation, we were a separate organization. Code for America was going through a revisioning process and so on. So I've talked about this previously. And then eventually, well, they did not like us using Code for Vegas as a name. They're very possessive, or they were. To what end? Good question. But so we renamed for a variety of reasons, the least of which was not dealing with Code for America, less dealing with Code for America, better. So they pulled the rug out from everybody in 2023, coming to an end more formally in December 2023. So they announced it earlier in the year, gave people time to kind of reorganize or to rename. Obviously, they don't use our names. They were heard to say. So Code for America brigades were kind of left to their own devices, given several months to reorg or do whatever they were going to try to do. There were, I want to say it was 80, was it 88? There were a lot of brigades around the country, around the United States, Hawaii, on the mainland, as people in Hawaii would say. And I don't know if there was a brigade in Alaska, but there were a lot, 88. There were 2 in the Nevada area. There was Hack for Reno, and there was Code for Vegas. So Hack for Reno seems to have fallen off the map. Code for Vegas is now Innovate for Vegas Foundation. And there it is. So while the brigade program shut down in December, almost a year ago now, the news had come months prior, as I mentioned, so nearly a year prior. I want to say it was like February or March. There was the public announcement that they were sunsetting it. There was the rumor. Now, I will be honest, I don't remember how, but I learned about this eventual change prior to the formal announcement, so I must have had some insider info. It was on the heels of the pandemic, which turned any in-person meetups and project gatherings into virtual events anyway, and that has been sort of the default. There are many organizations that have survived or continue that operate virtually, so virtual meetups and so on. And in many cases, it is possible to work on civic volunteer projects remotely or virtually. There is something to be said, though, for gatherings in person. And that's why we used to have our monthly hackathon meetups to get people in a room. We held them at the Innovation Center in the Innovation District here in our Innovation Destination City, so that you might innovate for Vegas. There generally then less participation because perhaps there is this virtual component, so less human interaction, more virtual interaction. So maybe that's something. As I've mentioned previously, participation in the greater Vegas area in our monthly hackathon meetups, for example, and other activities waned fairly quickly. After about 6 months of our monthly hackathon meetups, there was less and less interest, less and less participation. To be honest, what I observed was that there is a strong need to be told what to do. That sounds horrible, but that's the fact. Tell me what to do. What am I supposed to do? How can I participate? Where's the free food? So it's difficult to have food for people who don't know what they're doing or don't have a drive to do something. As an all-volunteer organization, we don't have employees. We don't have managers. We have peer collaboration, civic volunteers, peering, all at the same table, so to speak, not telling one another what to do, but collaborating as a whole team on initiatives and projects to elevate our communities. So there was a sort of a fundamental disconnect about how to participate in a civic volunteer organization, which is, it's one of the things we have to tackle. Part of our reboot process is to be accessible to people who have never done this before. And in fact, people who have never done this before are going to be easier to engage with from that perspective. They don't have expectations from, when we were a brigade, or back when we used to do, fill in the blank for Code for Vegas 10 years ago. Those people weren't coming by anyway. And by the way, I will give a shout out to Don Jacobson at the Innovation Center, has been completely supportive throughout. He was actually in close contact with the original Code for Vegas, so he knew all about it. Knew Sean Looker, for example, and the nature of the process, the nature of the organization, the nature of Code for Vegas, Code for America, and so on. So Don continues to be supportive to this day and is in the vast minority of city staffers and employees and so on. So the nature of Vegas with so many visitors to our destination city makes sense to reach out beyond Vegas. So if we can not limit ourselves to developing a pool of civic volunteers locally, we can reach out to where there may have been former brigades elsewhere, where there may be, in different corners of the planet, individuals who would be interested in being civic volunteers, not necessarily working on Vegas-specific projects, but on projects that can work in Vegas, where we have 40 million visitors and a population of around 2.3 or 2.4 million in the Clark County, Southern Nevada area. So there's a population of locals and there's a population of visitors, and some of those visitors may be from your city. So you can collaborate on some projects that are not Vegas-centric, and maybe they would work or be a part of something that would work where you are. So the basic idea, just like Vegas is a very transient city with people, native Vegas residents, locals are not necessarily a rarity, but they're not so easy to find sometimes. A lot of people in the Vegas area have lived here for 2 to 3 years. A lot will tend to disappear, and you may never know where they ended up. But if we can engage people in other places, not limit ourselves to the Vegas population, then we can enable and encourage, in fact, the things we want to accomplish everywhere, not only in Vegas, but Vegas being the destination city for so many visitors for various reasons, entertainment, sporting events, conventions, etc. There are so many people coming here. If we build things and we implement things that are interesting to a diverse population, such as our visitors, our guests, our tourists, our convention attendees, and so on. Then when they go home, they might say, ooh, we could do something like that here. Now, that's being very optimistic. More likely, we could say, and in fact, our attribution model is fairly explicit about this. Hey, this was brought to you by developers in these localities. Oh, that was somebody in our town. That would be some blue sky thinking there, but yeah, we'll get there. So there must be civic volunteers somewhere, and so ideally we'll get some of them to participate, and vice versa, in projects that are either not Vegas centric but happening in Vegas for people visiting or living in Las Vegas, but which are applicable elsewhere. Case in point, we had a project called My Vegas, which would be the human interface for our smart city. You can put smart in quotes if you like. There's a ways to go for most cities to become what anyone would consider a smart city. But we renamed My Vegas to My Muni, as in community or municipality. My Muni is not Vegas centric. The idea is to make an information sharing system, portal, platform, etc., that could be used anywhere. Think kind of like local news, kind of like social media, kind of like a Wikipedia, but kind of like that. But let's adopt some modernity, right? So this is a project that could be collaborated on by anyone, and whatever we come up with and whatever we develop over time, hopefully will integrate with other ideas and could and should be deployable open source software developed by civic volunteers, given full credit, and deployable wherever, not only in Vegas. So that is the plan. So we have to reach out in order to accomplish some of this. We began having our virtual office hours each week on Thursdays some time ago. And in fact, I'll tell you the story. I was participating in a conversation text on the Alliance of Civic Technologists Discord. And there was the conversation turned into, in order to have meetups, we need to have a Zoom account and costs money and so on. And I said, no, you can use Jitsi, completely open source chat platform, video, audio. I said, I did a podcast when I was living in Sunnyvale, California, in Silicon Valley. When I had a show called Doing Business in Sunnyvale, I had a conversation with the then CEO of 8x8, which is the primary sponsor of Jitsi. I liked the guy, I liked the company, I liked the effort, I liked the fact that they support this open source platform. You can be up and running in moments. And so as a demonstration, I said, okay, I'm setting up a conversation right now. And I created a live video meeting for completely free on Jitsi for 30 seconds, a minute maybe, and then it was up. I said, I'll be here for 20 minutes if you want to come by and give it a try. And I think one or two people did. And then from there I said, okay, we'll just continue having these office hours every week. And if people want to talk about civic volunteerism or how we are pursuing this, etc., then you're welcome. It's office hours. It's the same time every week, kind of an open agenda. There, come if you want. There, don't RSVP, just show up or don't. So we did that, and it's been going ever since. So it's been something. Now, it hasn't been every single week. There are always reasons to cancel. Being office hours, it's not essential. There's no agenda or specific schedule or, invite list, etc. So it's a pretty loose, but, we advertise it on our public calendar, etc. More interesting in the near term is outreach to others in their virtual meetups and topical gatherings on similar subjects. I attended an Open Austin meetup, like I said, online. I think it was 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago yesterday, I believe. Monday. It was a Monday. They have them every other Monday. You simply accept an Eventbrite, you get an Eventbrite ticket, so they accept you, I guess, for organization, for planning, head count, etc. So there were 3 people in this meetup. I had a discussion with the executive director of Open Austin. She was hosting the meeting, and they describe how to participate in Open Austin, how to join, how to work on projects, how to participate in their communities of practice, and so on. So I was not there to join, so I was there just to learn and to discuss. So we did that. So that's one way. So we have our office hours every week. Open Austin has a meetup every 2 weeks. Other organizations like Code for SAC, which will soon be OpenSAC, Open Sacramento, Code for Sacramento. Their executive director is sitting on our board of directors, Mary Norris. They have a weekly project meetup that starts off with a sort of an onboarding session and then breaks out into project, well, not kind of like breakout rooms. So everybody will do something a little bit different, and discovering other organizations and then having these conversations is one way to reach out, because you're seeing what we can call cohorts. What are other cohorts doing to conduct their business, to develop projects, to develop project ideas into projects, or as we would call them, initiatives, and just to see what other people are doing, see what works and what doesn't. Organizations and events like Civic Hackers and the upcoming Civic Hacker Summit offer possibilities to connect and communicate about various efforts, cohorts, opportunities that might otherwise not cross paths. If I did not see a mention of Open Austin I may have been on LinkedIn. I can't remember. I'm kind of read only on LinkedIn. I don't really interact nearly so much. I'm trying to get that down to 0. But I think I saw a mention of Open Austin. Open Austin is the last remaining brigade in Texas, which I think I mentioned, and they have a small number of projects. They have a fundraising goal. They're moving along. They've been a 501c3 since 2017. So they're doing their thing, their version of their thing, and others might learn from that. We might learn from that. We might have some ideas that are worth sharing. So something like the Civic Hacker Summit that will bring together different forms of civic volunteerism, civic hacking. These could be people on the municipal side, on the NGO side. It could be people doing actual volunteer efforts to work on civic elevation projects. It could be anything. So the summit will ideally bring together a variety of people. It's a virtual summit. So it, enables some conversations, presentations, discussions, and so on. And even in our super connected world, it's nice to have a focal point to bring some people together and, again, have people cross paths that might not otherwise. I know it seems counterintuitive. For as much connection as there is, maybe too much leads to fewer opportunistic collisions. I was going to say serendipitous, but that's been done. So events that are a little bit more classified. I don't mean secret. I mean like Civic Hacker Summit. Oh, okay. I can set my expectations. We're not just going to randomly show up and run into each other. It's, a little bit of an intent. But there is a connection problem in general. Finding other individuals and groups, which we can call cohorts for the purposes of the autonomous cohort tessellation, interested in civic volunteer endeavors is not really that easy. There was some value in the Code for America Brigade system from this perspective alone. So regardless of everything else, they did provide that intent in gathering links and projects so that you could find an Open Austin or a Code for SAC or a Code for Boston or, et cetera. There's a list of brigades. I think it was 80 something. So you could figure out who's doing what, where they are. It was not strictly managed from what I could take in at the time. So, 2 years ago, figuring out who was really working on projects or maybe this was historical, but not completely current. It was a little bit tricky, but there was some value in this. So they basically had a directory of other organizations doing similar things in similar ways. Tools like Google or Meetup are interesting. You would think Google would just be Google, but I think they've gotten worse at it, to be honest. If one is trying to locate others in this civic volunteer, civic hacking space, without the Code for America Brigade directory to fall back on as a sort of a baseline, I'll just Google, look for civic volunteer, use of terminology becomes interesting. So we are a volunteer organization. Do we say civic volunteer? Are you going to find us? Maybe. Will the algorithm help you? Who knows? The directory had some utility here. The tools like Google are useful, but the utility falls off pretty quickly. And then Meetup is kind of a hit or miss. I'll try to be kind. Here, the Alliance of Civic Technologists is trying to offer a successor that will do something similar, where organizations who meet their simple requirements, and I think. It was you need to have an online presence, you need to have regular meetups of some sort, and then you need to have a mentor program. And then I think there was a fourth thing that I'm not sure about. They can join the alliance, and they will be together and be discoverable and engageable for municipal partnerships and other business dealings and whatever else they have planned. The alliance has been in a curious state. I'll say that. It's a top-down organization, so it's a formal structure of sorts. There's governance. There's a simple list of requirements, though, to participate. So there you go. A parallel effort. I'm not anti-Alliance of Civic Technologists, by the way, but it is a top-down organization. I'm more of a bottom-up, enable the individual person. I don't know, advocate maybe. A parallel effort, though, intended to be more participant-driven, and again from the bottom up, rather than more formally structured from the top down, is our Project ACT initiative, which will ideally attract other adopters and perhaps drivers to build the process. So people that want to, quote unquote, join Project ACT, it's not really a matter of joining, it's a matter of contributing to documentation, tools, etc. Maybe even donations. Innovate for Vegas Foundation is the fiscal sponsor. Eventually, projectact.info may require some hosting, some utility for the catalog of cohorts and initiatives and open issues that people can contribute to. So there will be a catalog that's searchable a little bit more granularly than what's kind of available now. And then projectact.world is the more public-facing discovery platform where people in the world can discover what people are working on in the tessellation scheme of things. Tessellation, mosaic, a tapestry of what people are working on, who's doing what, and what are they doing. So ideally we'll attract people who are interested in what we're trying to accomplish, not only with the tessellation, but the transformation side of that coin. Some people are individuals. They want to build a group. They want to take that group and turn it into, hey, we want to do some similar things at Open Austin or Code for SAC or Open San Diego. I think there's another, there are several organizations here and there that are doing things, making them discoverable and enabling connection, communication, and collaboration is what Project ACT is about. So if you're an individual and you want to attract other people in your locality, the transformation side might be interesting to transform a loose collection of individuals interested with similar interests and goals. Hey, we don't all have to be coders. Guess what? So transforming from a loose, interested group into a nonprofit, or how do we participate with other organizations, et cetera. So the transformation step might be useful, but the tessellation is really about the connection, communication, and collaboration. It's all about discovery. Got to be found. And that's getting harder and harder. So speaking of the tessellation, I've kind of gone through these already, but the ideas that led to Project ACT are these the two sides of the coin. So the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Project was aimed at enabling groups of people, or even individuals, to move away from, to be honest, Code for America at the time. We formed as an independent 501c3. Like I said, we got our determination letter in October 2022. And within days of that, before or after, we were talking about Project ACT because some cohorts that were a part of the Code for America Brigade program were interested in being independent also. How come Code for Vegas gets to be independent? I heard through the grapevine. So we said, hey, we should try to come up with a way to enable others who don't like the direction, the methods, etc., that Code for America is pursuing. They could become, if you want to do what you're doing, but you don't want to do it under the Code for America umbrella, you should be able to transform into an autonomous cohort. So do you want to form a nonprofit, become a 501c3? Do you want to have hackathons? Do you want to have, what works best as far as code of conduct and contributor guidelines? What are your rules for minor participation? Like sharing that information so that people don't get surprised. I recently had a conversation with someone and they said, minor, under 18 participants can come to our events if they want, parental permission and whatnot. I said, okay, so what if you have a Discord server or a Slack or some other communication platform like that that's already not generally open? Those are kind of silos, right? You can't really see a Discord conversation if you're not a part of the Discord server. Now you start direct messaging and you don't know who might be speaking to whom about what in a private context that you're essentially hosting as a, the quote unquote owner of a Discord server. So minor participation with adults in the settings. And it was a kind of I hadn't thought about that side of it. So there's always some upside to having conversations like this about how to make these efforts work without anyone feeling as though there might be some problems. So we can just leave that there for now. But so the transformation step is about putting a best foot forward to try to accomplish the various goals of a cohort. I like that word cohort because it can be formal or informal, right? We're just a bunch of people that get together on Fridays and work on volunteer projects. Okay. Do you have to be a nonprofit? Nope. Do you need a website? Nope. Do you need a mentor program? Nope. Do you have to have regular meetups? Well, we kind of do on Fridays. Okay. But you don't have to. So keeping it very loose, driven by the people doing the work, putting in the effort, putting in the time, effort, and expertise, in fact, which is the three dimensions of the civic volunteer contribution, as I describe them. That's just, those are terms I use. There's no hard and fast rule about that. And then when so the other side of the coin for Project ACT, when Code for America decided to shut down their brigade program, and again, we started hearing about this soon after we started talking about Project ACT, and we renamed to Innovate for Vegas from Code for Vegas, Innovate for Vegas Foundation. There were the initial rumblings that Code for America may be shutting down their brigade program, and that formal announcement would come later, but the writing was on the wall, so to speak. So transformation seemed to take care of itself, like, nobody needs to transform from brigade to something else. If you don't have anything to move away from being a brigade, that was kind of done for you, right? If you're not a brigade, or if you were a brigade and now you're not, that part's done. Now it turns out that there still is a need for the transformation side of this in a different way, perhaps. But that the idea that we could help to enable connection, communication, and collaboration between cohorts of any size from 1 to infinity became interesting. Project ACT, Autonomous Cohort Tessellation. That sounds cool. And you can envision, as I do when I talk about this, people put stickers on their laptops, or they have T-shirts, they have banners. There's a logo. There's something about their project. Maybe there's a website with an avatar. There is a visualization component, and obviously that's not completely accessible to all. But the fact is, the mosaic, wherein you include these various logos and indicators into a visualization of the mosaic, then we could figure out how to make that audible. So it's useful for the vision impaired. So what does it mean to have a tessellation that cannot be seen? That is something I can pose to others as we increase our reach. So, but yeah, to make these visible, discoverable, which implies a degree of connection so that we know you're out there. And the brigade program of Code for America facilitated some of this. I never liked, but when I say never, I didn't really have too much time to be frustrated by this, but I never liked the way that they presented the work of the brigades in a almost more of a slideshow, not easily searched, and so on. So we can do better. I mentioned finding like-minded people through Google and Meetup. These tools are both awful for this purpose, and they're awful in general. I'm not a Meetup fan, and Google is not the old Google, not the old Google. Even a tool like GitHub, which can be somewhat useful in some cases to find projects and so on, becomes just as bad for things like Hacktoberfest, for example. This is Hacktoberfest 11 is going on right now for another 9 days. There are something, and by the way, they only support GitHub and GitLab. So your Hacktoberfest project must be a part of GitHub or GitLab. That's not horrible, but not completely useful. It's useful, but not completely useful. How about that? So you label your repository on GitHub or GitLab with a Hacktoberfest label, so you become searchable that you are participating in Hacktoberfest. Well, unfortunately, GitHub, for example, displays a search result of 140,000 plus. There are more. 140? No, I'm sorry. It might be. Let's look. Let me give you a real number. Today. Oops, sorry. I just did a plosive there. Topics. Hacktoberfest. I'm making all kinds of bad noises into the microphone. Sorry. So when you search for the Hacktoberfest topic, and you set the topic by adding a label to the repository about, so there are 142,548 public repositories matching this topic, Hacktoberfest, according to the search results. And you can reach this by github.com/topics, TOPICS/Hacktoberfest. They have 3 links to sort by programming language. They have, you can search by many more than that and using a drop-down filter selector. So 22,267 JavaScript, 19,221 Python, all the way down to C, the C language, 3,270. PHP, C++, Java, TypeScript, Go, CSS, HTML. So some projects are websites. It's difficult to say whether these are capturing the non-technical possibilities. They are trying to include non-coders, but that is a challenge. The other thing, I'm going to sort by least recently updated. So the top of the list is FireSphere image gallery. It was last updated on September 7, 2011. So how is Hacktoberfest 11 going on right now? It's more than 11 years ago. Anyway, so it has a Hacktoberfest label on it. It comes up first as the least recently updated. The next one, FireSphere Uploadify, also 2011. The list goes on. So there's a lot of stuff from 2011, which means the Hacktoberfest search scheme is not kept current. Also, how do you navigate 142,548 public repositories to find something you want to contribute to? Especially if you're new to all this, that's kind of scary. So yeah, it's very noisy out there. There's a lot of stuff going on, and you're trying to pack this kind of outreach to newcomers. Hey, we want to attract new contributors to open source projects and so on. Here's 140,000 things to look at, and you have 31 days. Go. So these are basically in-group notions. That is, if you know, you know, to find each other. So you can, if you know about Hacktoberfest, if you know the general idea, and if you know how to get your way around GitHub and GitLab. I think the fact that you can only use GitHub and GitLab is severely limiting. So that's one of my concerns. I actually did a whole podcast about this 3 weeks ago, I think. So if you do listen to the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, you may have already heard me going on. I think Hacktoberfest lasting for a month is not the best idea. But these are in-group notions. Now, does anyone looking in from outside, so to speak, have any idea what is going on here? Podcasts like this one, maybe, more websites, another video and audio content, more traditional media coverage, like some mention in your local news outlet would be nice. Mentions by other local organizations, like, hey, shout out to, Open Hack for, Code for, etc., for helping out, for being a part of, for enabling, for etc. More finished volunteer-driven projects for the world to try. So that's probably one of the best ways, is to say, here's a thing that we built. Here's civic volunteerism in action, and then have people use it, whatever it is, and then say, oh, this is cool. I'm going to tell my friends about it. So yes, to all of these things, we need more of all these ways of being discovered and being appreciated, and celebrating civic volunteer participation. The time, effort, and expertise that people contribute can sometimes fall under the radar. So make sure people's names are visible. Here's the work that they did. Hey, guess what? It wasn't code. It was marketing. It was telling the story. It was debugging our documentation. It was translating our documentation so others could read it. It was making sure that we're accessible so people with vision impairments can still use our what we're working on, and so on and so on. So this is a part of Project ACT as well. So the discovery and advertisement part, the phase 2, if you will, Project ACT.world, is to take the tessellation. So the tessellation is about discovery of other projects. Hey, we're working on a project. You're working on a project. There are ways we can collaborate. Great. Project ACT.world is, I didn't know people were working on this stuff. Everybody knows about Linux, but there's a ton of open source projects that never see the light of day from the normal world, even though they are used every day. So yeah, getting some visibility, getting some light to shine on the tessellation, as it were. Phase 2. Let's talk about summits and stories. Let me take some water first. I mentioned the Civic Hacker Summit coming up later this year, possibly in December, early December. I participated in a planning meetup on Friday last week. Topics that the summit might focus on, the summit moving towards implementation, just the ball is rolling. There's a great opportunity for outreach and engagement within the in-group, so people who are already doing these things. I don't mean just to make it sound like, if you're not in, you're out, but it's just people who do know and are doing these things versus the people who may not even have any idea. Somewhere in the gray area is the people who don't know how to be in the in-group, but they intend to. The individuals and groups of people who aren't a brigade or a former brigade. They aren't a nonprofit, but they would love to take their time and volunteer it for community elevation. So that's great. It's an opportunity to provide visible examples to others who are either in or looking in. So all virtual. So these are opportunities for people curious, whether they're municipal, maybe someone on your city council or somebody who works for your economic development office of your city or town, or somebody who's involved in planning or community development, people that are part of an NGO or maybe a potential volunteer or supporter. They can consume these presentations that are a little bit more horizontal. They're not hearing from your organization. They're hearing from a variety of organizations and individuals, and a kind of okay, I see how the bigger picture might look, and some possibilities for interaction, and how can we collaborate, and so on. So there could be some real utility there for people who are not specifically in the group of civic volunteers, but who could be working with, partnering with, be adjacent to, be supporters of, or, join in, enable and encourage. And any presentations and discussions about all of this, as it is today and as it could be in the future, would be interesting, not only for people in the in-group, but for people looking in, curious, or I didn't know this, but I should. Yeah. So possibilities. Stories in general are great and essential, and they are the way people find out about things like civic volunteerism, with some emotional appeal attached. So it's not the mechanics of you have an idea, you have a project, you just why. Start with why, as Simon Sinek might say. A real story from a real person about a real undertaking with real outcomes can go a long way. But those stories need to be told, and they need to be found so that they may be consumed. If a story is told and no one's there to hear it, did it make a noise? But those stories need to be told again. So they need to be found, they need to be told so they can be found, they need to be shared so that others can find them, etc. This is not about forming isolated discussion groups on Slack or Discord, or even not quite open Facebook groups, Telegram, chat groups that could be private or could be accessible to others, but these are all silos. There's some utility sometimes, but they are not great for broad outreach and discoverability. So, not a fan myself. We need to have real publication of real stories that can be found and shared anywhere. So actual deployed projects go a long way, right? And then the backstory, who contributed? How did this come about? Why did we do this? How did we accomplish this? Our office hours is a tiny example of this. The Civic Hacker Summit is a large example of this. Somewhere in between is more engagement, discussion, and even storytelling across geographical boundaries. Just because you're not in Austin or Vegas or Sacramento or Boston or Cincinnati or anywhere, just because you're not physically located in a particular place doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to participate in some way, even listening, even learning with others in other places. So we live in a virtual world. Our emphasis on innovation rather than code. But not only geographical boundaries, but also across interest areas. I forgot that part. So you should be able to learn not only about coding, but about language translation. How do you work with people in a city? How do you work with city governments? How do you work with non-government organizations? How do you deal with donations and donors and publication of their participation and what's possible? All that. So our emphasis on innovation rather than code is something we could talk more about. How to interact with the partners for municipal initiatives. So not everything must be code. I proposed one time a dumb city hackathon, and I actually did an episode on dumb cities. In the event of a natural disaster, which we have had recently on the east side of the United States with Helene and what was the... I'm totally spacing on the name, Milton. Yeah, Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Helene was particularly damaging. So when your smart city becomes dumb, no power, no internet, no things we've come to depend on. What do you do about that? When I proposed it here in Vegas, they immediately said, let's send you over to our IT department. And I said, no. This is about the absence of IT. They just didn't get it. So how do you interact with your potential partners in your locality? Having examples to point to might be useful. So we emphasize innovation in general, not specifically code. So making that clear and demonstrating the potential and attracting people who want to participate in civic volunteer efforts that are not code. There's sort of an education there. A hackathon that isn't laptops and Red Bull. Okay. So how to reach out to potential donors, how to organize a hackathon, all useful for those in the in-group, the people that are actually doing things, whether they're individuals or cohorts or somewhere in between, and those looking and maybe considering some type of engagement. So those looking in to the in-group, right? Those outside looking in. And I don't want to use the term out-group so much. I don't want to emphasize that they're not in, but if you want to keep it simple, people that are doing, that have organizations or that have a cohort or have a group or have an interest. And then there are people who don't know. I didn't know people were doing this. I didn't know I could be a part of this. I didn't know I could volunteer. I didn't know I could sponsor, donate, that I could come up with a project idea about community elevation, et cetera. So there's a lot of story that could lead to more information, some education, participation, all good shun words, but no shunning. Communication about need and participation. Hey, what a segue. We are pursuing the Agile for Volunteers initiative specifically to enable communication about initiatives and component projects, and to make participation in civic volunteer anything not only a bit easier to coordinate, but also to discover and celebrate. Once again, I edit my notes very briefly. In the Hacktoberfest example, there is a label, like I said, used in GitHub and GitLab repositories. We already went through that. So it's an annual month-long event, which is a starting point for participants to find something of interest. From there, it can be tricky to find something. Like I said, it's a lot of search results to search through. From a qualitative standpoint, there may be something of a meat market element to this process, a sort of pick my repository. And you'll see some of that in Hacktoberfest discussions on Discord, their Discord server. Hey, we're working on this project. You'll see articles written, hey, if you want to participate in the whatever, companies that are participating have the resources to have a social media engagement tracked, perhaps. Credit is given through the pull request process, and you get badges if you do 4 pull requests on a Hacktoberfest, one or more Hacktoberfest participating projects, repositories. Then you can get your participation badge. And then what? Hacktoberfest comes to an end until next year. So how do you maintain that connection and momentum? And I already mentioned that some Hacktoberfest repositories just never get removed from the Hacktoberfest menu. So you end up with 104. Well, how many of those are real and legitimate? And how many of them are interesting and would be compatible with your skill set as a newcomer or even a returning newcomer to the notion of contributing to open source projects? So I'm not totally sure that Hacktoberfest scales. Not only scales in breadth, number of projects that are out there that are participating, but in longevity. Like, what happens to someone who wants to continue contributing, but the projects that they found were not great? Do I have to wait until next year? So our idea is to break projects into digestible components, like features and user stories, and describe tasks to implement those, and then advertise those to people who might want to lend their time, effort, and expertise. Remember the civic volunteer dimensions. To initiatives and projects that can provide these information tidbits. So if I'm looking through those 142,000 projects and I can find, we have a task. It's implementing a search query that will iterate, or that will query a nested set of rows arranged in a simple hierarchy with adjacency list elements, so we can determine which element in a tree is a part of which subtrees and so on. And we need to iterate over that so that we can determine membership in different groups for the purposes of, so we can get fairly detailed with what we want to accomplish with a task, and perhaps use something like machine learning tools to classify that detailed description of a particular task so that it could be discoverable. So now, if you've broken now you don't have to use Agile for Volunteer, but this is our starting point. So we can break your initiatives and projects down into these little morsels. You can say, okay, here's what we want to accomplish. Here's the feature we want to implement. Here's a user story with a particular, justification, if you will, the need. What am I trying to accomplish as a user? Why is this important? How should it be accomplished? What should the user expect as an outcome? And then the task gets around to actually implementing a user story or a feature. If I'm combing through 142,000 story projects for Hacktoberfest and I come upon the hierarchical database query that I mentioned, you might say, that I know how to do that. I will submit a pull request on this task after I look at it. Now, how does this task fit into, it's in a hierarchy of issues in GitHub in this case. Connected issues. So here's an epic with some features and some user stories, and this task is an implementation of this user story, which it's part of this epic. So you don't have to read pages of documentation, or you don't have to write pages of documentation. You can provide these pieces of information to a potential contributor to your project in a much more succinct way that we hope will be more discoverable, with a whole team approach and iterative improvement of our process, as well as our initiatives. So not only the Agile for Volunteers initiative itself, but all of our initiatives and component projects. We adopt the origin story of Agile methodologies, that is the Agile Manifesto, not the perturbations of the Agile method in the Agile industrial complex, which has turned it into just another management tool to berate workers. Little editorial. And if all goes to plan, advertise our initiatives, our outcomes, and most important perhaps, except for the perhaps part, most important, our participants and contributors, using something like Project Act, Two Great Tastes. So getting the word out is the last section, I promise. My clock says 1 hour and 8 minutes, but as you may or may not know, I do truncate silence, so we'll bring it down a little bit. And you can always listen to this at 2x if you want, probably 1.5x. I listen to audiobooks at 1.25x unless I want to rush through them. So I think 1.25 is good for me, 1.2 sometimes. Getting the word out, though, is where we will close. As an all-volunteer organization, every moment contributed to the organization, to the work, to the efforts, to the everything, will ideally yield some sort of value for the organization and to some extent in return to the person, right? A return on investment. So if I contribute my time, which I have, I'd like to get something back for it, whether it's personal satisfaction, whether it's the engineering, I always tell people sometimes I want to work on something just to see if it works. The intellectual curiosity of the engineering mind, if I can plug that. Presently, here in the Greater Vegas area, we struggle to get the word out to aspiring and nascent civic volunteers for any number of reasons, not the least of which is what we could call a show don't tell mindset or need. The mindset is okay, but you can tell a story to people in Vegas, but they really want to see something working. It's in my travels, in my experience, it's tricky to find people who see the opportunity in the chaos. They need to be shown. Like, so tell me what to do or show me the thing working. And that's from city staffers to normal. But in general, this is not Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, you would, if you mention having grown up, if you will, in Silicon Valley from 1993 to 2001 and 2005 to 2013, my 2 tours, which I have done audio programs about previously, a culture of innovation will be visible in the eyes, the faces of people to whom you are telling a story about an idea, possibility. Oh, I'm already seeing some things that I could come up with or could add to this, or we could collaborate on a thing. Like there's always this, the juices are flowing, if you will, right? They're like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing. I see what you're going. I see what could be. And here in the Vegas area, from my experience so far, it is very much about, well, show me the thing working, and I will think about whether I want to be a part of it, as long as there's free food. So by showing and not telling, we can perhaps stir that feeling of FOMO, fear of missing out. And that is the thing. The thing is FOMO, which we will hope to create or create a sense of FOMO by having working things. Like, you could have been working on this from day one, but now we've deployed version 1, so we'll see how it goes. So we have a website, we have a Discord server, which nobody really uses anymore. We have media outreach like this audio program. We have a very small number of people who have expressed interest and support since we rebooted in 2022. Some of them has sort of drifted off. But casting a wider net and drawing in more interest and participation are essential. Finding these locally, whether it's volunteers, supporters, partners for projects, finding these locally would be great. It is something we aim for, but waiting for the time to come is a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So if we don't build it, will they come from Vegas? But if they don't come from Vegas, can we build it? So do they come first to join in, or do we build it first and then they come by because of FOMO? Hey, that looks cool. Can I work on that? I don't really see that happening, but it could. It could happen. Eventually, it must happen. A culture of innovation is essential in the modern era. You cannot have a city that's waiting to be told what to do. Ideally, we will make civic volunteerism more of a thing here in Vegas, as it is in some corners today. Now, civic volunteerism in general is not missing in action in Vegas. I don't want to imply that nobody is doing anything. There are volunteer organizations. There are people who focus some of their time on volunteer projects, volunteer efforts. There are actual outreach resources. Some companies have an outreach office. They have funding. They have budget to pay their employees, to contribute to specific projects, to endeavors. So these exist here in Vegas. Vegas is a city of human beings, so it's not, I make blanket statements occasionally which are not intended to be universally 100% and more statistically often the case. But there are people who volunteer their time, who contribute to civic community elevation endeavors. So I don't want to cast aspersions on those people and their efforts. But as I've mentioned, launching our Mastodon server as a community service could be one way to sort of communicate these things between organizations that are nonprofits, that are performing community elevation volunteer efforts, that are enabling civic volunteerism, that are driven by it, and perhaps a driver of donations our Mastodon server could be. And most importantly, perhaps a practical vehicle that we can use to get the word out about our organization and what we're trying to accomplish. Bubbling to the top of the to-do list, Mastodon.Vegas could be. What do you think? Would you join the Fediverse if you have not already, or add another account to your existing presence on in the the fantasy notion of the Fediverse? It's not quite the metaverse, because the Fediverse is actually in use. Would you use the Mastodon.Vegas platform? Are you familiar with Mastodon? Are you familiar with activity streams and activity pub? You don't really need to be. So deploying a Mastodon.Vegas server would be relatively straightforward. There'd be some cost involved. Could we use that as a donation vehicle to advertise our existence? Due to the nature of how activity streams and activity pub and Mastodon are implemented, it could be part of our overall smart city strategy. One of our capstone endeavors is to make our smart city smarter. So having a Vegas branded, if you will, Mastodon server, Mastodon presence here in Vegas, Mastodon.Vegas, would be interesting. It'd be something new, something novel, something gee whiz, could enable different types of communication beyond our communication silos that we have. They're very prevalent here in the Vegas area. So that's one idea to get the ball rolling. The MyMuni and Welcome initiatives, two great tastes again, to communicate with people who live here and people who visit here, and to provide information in new and interesting ways using modern technology. The various other initiatives, they all kind of fit together. So getting started with a Mastodon instance, the Mastodon server software exists. So this would be an integration and deployment process, not really a civic volunteer development process, but it's a starting point. Some people will say, why don't we just use WordPress? Well, you can read news about WordPress and all the chaos going on there. But the bottom line is there's always going to be a mixture of implementation, novel implementation, creativity. Should we just build it with AI? No, let's actually have human beings collaborate, work together, collaborate and learn together to make things, to build things, to solve real problems. If you type in a description, a prompt into AI, and you spin out something that seems to work, do you understand what you just created or what it created for you? So we kind of sidestep the notion of AI and prefer human participation, and that could be language translation or creative work like visualizations or audio components, elements, interaction with people who are not completely sighted or with completely wonderful hearing. So making accessible things that another human might understand where an AI may not. So human factor, human interaction, community elevation that includes the people around you and around us, our communities. So the motivation is fairly human. Include pets. You know, who doesn't want pets to get some out? There will be occasion to develop things that will benefit pets. How about that? So humans, pets, domesticated or other animals in general, life. Why not volunteer some of your time and make that better? And so we are in that game, hopefully by collaborating with others of a similar mindset, doing similar things in faraway places or nearby places. We will all begin to advance our various causes and elevate our various communities, but also make some sort of progress where everybody can get on one page about what that means, which is better outcomes, more participation from more people who are valued and who see the value in their own participation and contributions and those of others. And generally if you're familiar with root locus, you want the poles to be on the right side of the plane, right? You want a completely unstable growth of civic volunteerism so that it explodes to infinity, and some interesting novel ideas, elevated communities, and so on all result. And people participating with new skills, new abilities to collaborate, to put their skills to use in other ways, and the list goes on. So there you go. That's behind the scenes. That's the stuff going on in our board meetings, our discussions, some outreach to other organizations, our participation in things like Civic Hacker Summit, if that, I assume we are, come December once the plans are ironed out, and more. And every day is always the beginning of what comes next. And that is where I will leave it. Don't forget, innovateforvegas.org. You can visit that site to get started. If you are curious about our various endeavors, the goal of having guests on this program is not gone away, but booking guests is always a challenge here in Vegas. Discovery of content creators, audio, video, and otherwise, is in the feature set of the MyMuni initiative. So hopefully when we deploy that, it'll be a little bit easier to find, maybe even participate, not only in our media productions, but those of others. There are a lot of content creators doing some very interesting things in Vegas, and occasionally they might be interested in what you have to say, as we are. And that is where I will leave it today. Thank you so much for listening on this, the 22nd of October, 2024. My elapsed time says 1 hour, 21 minutes. See if we can get it down to 1:15 maybe. Until next time.